Well, good morning, everyone. We are still seeing people logging in, so we're going to wait just a minute, but we will start shortly. Okay, well, again, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our virtual Advanced Clean Fleets Workgroup meeting, sponsored by the California Air Resources Board. Again, I still see people logging in, but I do want to get started. So today's meeting will focus on the emissions inventory associated with the proposed Advanced Clean Fleets regulation, and is meant to continue the discussion on topics raised by stakeholders during our September 9th workshop. Today's meeting is the fourth of several workgroup meetings intended to provide more focused discussions on specific topic areas of the regulation. Additional meetings on zero-emission vehicle fueling infrastructure are being planned for December and January. Details regarding these upcoming meetings are available on our Advanced Clean Fleets website. And I do want to let everyone know that this meeting is being recorded. So by entering the Zoom meeting, you are agreeing to being recorded. A copy of this recording will be made available on our website. Today's meeting is part of the Advanced Clean Fleets regulatory efforts of achieving a zero-emission truck and bus California fleet by 2045 everywhere feasible, and significantly earlier for certain market segments such as last mile delivery and drayage applications. The goal of this effort is to accelerate the number of medium and heavy duty zero emission purchases to help achieve a full transition to zero emission vehicles in California as soon as possible. My name is Craig During, and I am managing the efforts for the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. I will be joined shortly by several of my colleagues, including Tony Brazil, Branch Chief in our Mobile Source Control Division, Fangyan, Manager in our Air Quality Planning and Science Division, and also from the Air Quality Planning Science Division, we have Sherry Salamor, Lei Zhao, and Stephanie Kong. We will also be joined by Paul Arnasia, who is the lead staff working on this regulation. Stephanie will be our presenter today. The purpose of today's meeting is to discuss the emissions inventory reductions we expect to achieve based on the draft regulation language that was released for public comment on August 25th. Our intention is to allow for full and open communication throughout the meeting and allow our stakeholders to ask questions, seek clarification, and provide comments specific to the emissions inventory analysis on the regulation. So the structure of today's meeting will follow the similar format as our previous workgroup meetings. We will first present a brief overview of the emissions inventory associated with this regulation, and then open the meeting to participant comments and questions for the remainder of our scheduled 2-hour allotted time. And let me remind our participants that our focus today is on the emissions inventory associated with the regulation. Therefore, I encourage everyone to hold any comments or questions related to topics specific to fueling infrastructure for our future upcoming workgroup meetings that are being planned for December and January. Okay, so the materials for today's meeting are available on our Advanced Clean Fleets website by clicking on the Meetings and Events link. This includes access to the presentation, the draft regulation language, and links to our informal comment log and comment submittal form. Informal comments on this regulation can be made during this workgroup meeting, or you can submit them by using our comment submittal form link that I just mentioned. And let me remind everyone again that this meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on our website for those unable to attend or simply interested in viewing again. During today's meeting, the chat feature will not be available. Therefore, you will only be able to ask a question or make a comment verbally by raising your hand and using your microphone. We will call on individuals in the order your hand was raised. And again, please, when you are called upon, please unmute your mic, state your comment or question. And just a reminder, due to the expected large number of participants, I would very much appreciate if speakers could limit your comments to no more than 2 to 3 minutes so others have the opportunity to speak. And finally, if you are experiencing any technical difficulties during this meeting, please email Harinder Fagura for assistance. His email address can be found on the meeting notification bulletin you received to register for this event. And with all of that said, let me introduce Stephanie Kong, who will walk us through today's presentation. Take it away, Stephanie.
Thank you, Craig. So today I will go over details with emission inventory design and modeling for the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. The state of California has an ambitious position of clean air requirements and climate goals that we're working on to meet over the next 30 years. This is the timeline of implementation plans we need to meet for the state and also for South Coast and San Joaquin Valley, the two areas with the most concerning ozone and fine particulate levels in the nation. There is also an immediate need to reduce emissions and exposure in the state's highly impacted, low-income, and disadvantaged communities in 2024 and 2025. Climate goals include midterm target in 2030 for 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emission below the 1990 levels, and also long-term targets in 2045 for carbon neutrality, and by 2050 for greenhouse gases 80% below the 1990 level. The State Implementation Plan, or the SIP, Climate Scoping Plan Mobile Source Strategy, and the Sustainable Freight Action Plan set forth goals that necessitate the transition of California's trucking fleet to zero emissions everywhere feasible, with the cleanest fuels and combustion everywhere else. The governor's executive order established a target for the transportation sector that helps put the state on a path to carbon neutrality by 2045. New passenger cars and trucks will be zero emission by 2035. 100% of medium and heavy duty vehicles in the state be zero emission by 2045 for all operations where feasible, and by 2035 for drayage trucks. The state will transition to 100% zero emission off-road vehicles and equipment by 2035 where feasible. ACF will target both vehicles with manufacturer growth vehicle weight rating, or GVWR, above 8,500 pounds and off-road yard tractors. The ACF regulation is divided into separate sections depending on applicability or fleet type. These requirements currently focus on the following fleets, including public fleets, drayage, and high priority fleets, plus 100% manufacturer sales requirement by 2040. The ACF team has presented current draft regulatory language and cost analysis in a workshop held back in September, followed by a serious workshop in the last couple months focused on different regulated sectors. Today, we will continue this conversation by taking a closer look into the emission inventory modeling. As ACF is targeting vehicles with gross vehicle weight rating above 8,500 pounds, it will include Class 2P23 trucks and vans, Class 4 through 8 street trucks and buses, or sometimes referred to Class 4 through 8 vocational vehicles, as well as the Class 7 to 8 tractors. Here's a snapshot of the total daily truck populations and emissions separated by the 3 truck groups in calendar year 2021. Both activity and emission data are from the latest statewide emission inventory model, MFAC 2021, which is also the basic framework we used for ACF emission inventory modeling. So on an average day in California, as we can see here, there are in total about 1.8 million trucks operating on the road, and 64% of them are Class 2B to 3 truck and vans, 24% are Class 4 through 8 vocational vehicles, and only 12% of them are Class 7 to 8 tractors. However, the 12% of population accounts for almost half of the daily NOx emission from trucks, while the Class 2B to 3 and Class 4 through 8 vocational vehicles splitting the other half. Please note that none of the inventory data, or including activity or emission, includes motorhomes, transit buses, or school buses from MFAC, because ACF will not cover those vehicle categories. In the next couple slides, I will go over details and assumptions that we use to determine the vehicles that will be affected by the current ACF proposal. More specifically, we will first take a look at the 3 regulated sectors: public, drayage, and high priority fleets, one by one. First, let's start with public fleets. The current proposal defines public vehicles as those owned by cities, counties, special districts, and state agencies. Please note that this section does not apply to federal fleets, which will be regulated along the high priority fleets. These fleet owners would be required to purchase zero-emission vehicles when they make new purchases following this schedule, such that 50% of the purchase from 2024 to 2026 model year and 100% for 2027 and newer model year. Until 2035, these fleets may purchase near zero emission vehicle or NZEV if no ZEV is available. NZEVs are defined as plug-in hybrids that meet the minimum all-electric range requirements by different model years. In addition, 3-year exemption will be granted for designated counties, which are highlighted in red on this map. In terms of emission modeling for public fleets, we first identified public vehicles using the California DMV vehicle registration database. Class 2B to 8 trucks and buses with registered exempt plates or flagged. This not only includes Class 4 through 8 public vehicles that are already defined as they are in MFAC and 2021, but also Class 2B to 3 truck and vans, heavy-duty buses, as well as Class 8 solid waste collection vehicles. In total, as of calendar year 2019, around 75,000 Class 2B to 3 and 64,000 Class 4 through 8 vocational vehicles have been identified to subject to the ACF public fleet requirements. In addition, the same ZEV purchase requirement and the 3-year exemption for designated counties are also considered in the current modeling as stated in the regulatory language, while NZEV is not included in the inventory model. Next, we're going to look at the drayage sector. Drayage trucks are defined as on-road, heavy-duty trucks that transport containers and bulk to and from the seaports and intermodal rail yards. The purpose or the highlight of the ACF drayage component is to accelerate this transition of drayage trucks operating at intermodal seaports or rail yards to zero emission. The detailed transition to zero-emission drayage is specified as below. First, starting late 2023, only zero-emission vehicles may be added to the CARB drayage truck registry. For legacy drayage trucks with inner combustion engines, they will retire from the drayage service when engine model is either 13 years old or when the accumulated mileage reaches 800,000 miles, whichever comes last. The Lexi service will have to retire when the model is more than 18 years old. In addition, a Lexi drayage truck that is currently registered in the CARB DTR must visit a regulated port or intermodal rail yard at least once each calendar year to remain in DTR. This table here displays the 2019 drayage truck inventory, which is the base year inventory developed using the latest available data. The column on the left shows vehicle categories, and then the column to the right shows different drayage inventory groupings. The first row of the table, in-state Class 8 active trucks, displays the vehicle counts by fleet group that are included in the ACF drayage inventory. The truck inventory for Port of LA and Long Beach, and also for Port of Oakland, were developed based on VIN level information provided directly from the ports. From these two ports, the total distinct VIN numbers are provided on the last row, and this information was post-processed so that we took out the trucks visiting both ports from the POC inventory to avoid double counting. In addition, we have also excluded infrequent visitors from the VIN list provided by Port of LA, and since no such information was provided by Port of Oakland, we considered all vehicles from POC are active visitors. We also excluded Class 4 through 8 trucks and trucks with out-of-state registration from the drayage inventory. Although the inactive trucks, the Class 4 through 7 trucks or the out-of-state trucks are not included in the port drayage inventory, they are being counted in other MFAC vehicle categories and may still subject to ACF fleet requirement if they meet the high priority fleets or public fleets criteria, which will be discussed later. The other seaport inventory in the third column was estimated from a past survey. All three seaport inventory, including POC, POLA, and other ports, are part of the current official MFAC 2021 inventory. However, as for rail yard drayage, MFAC is not currently considering such a category, and we used aggregated vehicle fleet information provided by UP and BNSF railroads to build an inventory for rail yard drayage specifically for ACF. In the current MFAC 2021 drayage inventory, we assume that thousands of trucks who subject to the diesel truck and bus rule 2010 engine standards will, so highlighted by this black box here, will get replaced by used truck prior to 2023. As you can see, this plot, which shows the detailed model year distribution for calendar year 2022 and 2023 for the drayage component, all these old trucks will get replaced by the 6 to 8 year old trucks in 2023 due to truck and bus rule. Based on historical registration data and level information, we have seen this trend that drayage fleets tend to purchase used vehicle regardless of regulation compliance, and that's why we project that the Lexi vehicles will replace by these used ones in 2023. This prior purchase is included in MFAC 2021, mainly due to the observed purchase pattern, and we use the 2023 inventory as a baseline to project emission benefits for the ACF drayage component. In addition to population and vehicle age distribution, because of the useful life requirement for Lexi vehicles under the proposed regulation, we here also examine the average age when a drayage truck reaches the ACF mileage requirement. Based on both the DMV registration data and also the data from California Vehicle Inventory and Use surveys, or CalVIUS, we are seeing an average drayage truck will reach 800,000 miles around age 15. And here in the ACF inventory modeling, we assume that a Lexi vehicle will get retired when engine model year reaches 15 years or more. Here is a summary of major assumptions or main modeling criteria we're using for the ACF drayage emission inventory. First, from modeling perspective, Late 2023, as stated in the regulatory language, will be reflected starting 2024. Thus, all new drayage trucks of model year 2024 and plus are assumed to be zero-emission vehicles, and vehicles added to the drayage truck registry must be zero-emission vehicles, which implies that inner combustion engine vehicle population will start shrinking after the regulation is in place. Based on the DMV and CalVICE data that we just looked, Lexi diesel trucks will be removed from the registry when engine age reaches 15 or more. Current ACF drayage inventory includes two components: port drayage, which is developed using the existing data drayage inventories in NEMFAC 2021, and also the real drayage component, developed from scratch, and this portion of drayage trucks are originally listed or included as Class 8 tractors in NEMFAC 2021. Therefore, once the real yard inventory was established, this portion of trucks were taken out from the Class 8 tractor category when developing the high priority inventory. The last component of the ACF fleet purchase requirement is high priority and federal fleets. The definition of high priority and federal fleets have been given in previous workshops, and I'll just show it here again for consistency. The fleets subject to high priority and federal requirements include those who own or dispatch 50 or more vehicles under common ownership or control, earn more than $50 million gross annual revenue with at least one vehicle, or are federal government fleets, or higher affected fleets, or are subsidiaries or fleet combinations totaling 50 or more trucks. The ZEV requirements of high priority and federal fleets are given with what we call milestone phasing schedule, which sets the required percentage of the total fleet that must be zero emission by a certain year. The phasing schedule has been divided into three different groups, with the first group meeting 100% zero emission vehicle goal by 2035, and the last group by 2042. In order to identify fleets who are subject to ACF high priority requirement, we use the following data sources to flag the vehicles that fit in this given criteria. First, we use Dun & Bradstreet database to identify entities with more than $50 million annual revenue that operates at least one vehicle in California, then cross-check with the registration database to identify vehicles owned by them. Then we use the DMV and IRP registration database to further identify entities that own more than 50 vehicles. We also used the Advanced Clean Truck large entity reporting data to estimate the population of subhauler and contractors who may use a different registration information than their actual fleet operator and not directly trackable using DMV or IRP registration database. In addition, we built an inventory for the off-road yard tractors using data from DOORS database, which is an online reporting system for the in-use off-road diesel fueled fleets regulation. Please note that this off-road regulation already excluded those that will be regulated under the cargo handling equipment or CHE regulation, so there is no overlap or double counting the benefits between these two regulations. Another thing to point out is that since high priority fleet ZEV requirements are given as phasing fractions by target years, in the current inventory modeling, the ZEV fractions between these milestone years are linearly interpolated. In the last slide, we mentioned that we used the ACT reporting to estimate the subhauler population that will also subject to the ACF high priority fleets requirement. This large entity one-time reporting was required as part of the 2020 Advanced Clean Trucks or ACT regulation, which requires affected entities to report vehicle information and facility or home-based location. Based on the data collected from this reporting, we estimated that 20% of the regulated fleets are operated by subhaulers or contractors for in-state vehicles, Therefore, this 20% adjustment factor was applied to all in-state vehicle categories, except utility, solid waste collection vehicle, and off-road yard tractors, as these vehicles are less likely to be contracted. Here we present the total affected population under the current ACF high priority requirements that were identified using the above methods in calendar year 2019. With the subpolar adjustment applied, there are in total 72,000 Class 2B to 3, 170,000 Class 4 through 8 vocational, and 111,000 Class 7 to 8 tractors that will subject to ACF high priority fleets requirement. With all the modeling components considered, here we're going to show some of the modeling results based on the most recent draft regulation presented back in September. This slide here shows the total affected vehicles under the current ACF proposal. Just as the public, drayage, and high priority fleets we showed before, all the data here are also for calendar year 2019, since that is the most recent registration information available to us. As we can see here, about 12% of Class 2B to 3, 50% of Class 4 through 8 vocational, and 68% of Class 7 to 8 tractors will be regulated under the ACF purchase requirement. Please note here that we are only including the 3 regulated sectors on this plot without showing the population that will be affected by the 2040 sales requirement. Here, we're only seeing 12% of the Class 2B through 3 belong to public and high priority groups. Most of the rest will actually be covered by the ACT and ACF manufacturer sales requirement, which will also bring a significant numbers of ZEVs to this vehicle group. Here we present the overall projected technology distribution for all Class 2B to 8 trucks in California. This projection not only includes the 3 different sectors or regulated groups, but also considers the 100% ZEV sales requirement starting 2040 for trucks which are first sold in California. This part of modeling is very similar to what has been done for the advanced clean trucks regulation inventory modeling, which is with the extension of ZEV sales percentage to 100%. In addition to the projection of population and technology distribution under the current ACF proposal, we here also show the number of ZEV from ACT, as you can see from this black dashed line. As you can see here, ACF is constantly bringing more zero-emission vehicles to the inventory as compared to ACT, with more than 1.2 million ZEVs by 2045, as compared to the 780,000 brought by ACT. We have also separated the technology distribution by vehicle class. And here it shows the projection for Class 2B to 3 vehicles. Unlike heavier trucks that may be purchased out of state, we know that 100% of Class 2B to 3 vehicles will be first sold in California or use California certified engines. So the impact of the manufacturer's sales requirement is big. Because of the new 100% sales by 2040, we are seeing that ACF brings more ZEVs than ACT, resulting almost 600,000 Class 2B to 3 ZEVs by 2045, which is a 30% increase compared to what was originally included in ACT. Then for the Class 4 through 8 vocational trucks and buses, with both the sales and purchase requirement in place, the current ACF proposal will bring 210,000 zero-emission vehicles by 2035, and this number goes up to 370,000 in 2045, which is 90,000 more than what ACT is bringing in. The difference between ACT and ACF ZEV numbers becomes more significant for Class 7 to 8 tractors. Based on vehicle registration survey data that we use for NFAC development, many tractors were purchased out of state or not with non-California certified engines. That is to say, a large portion of the tractor population will not be regulated under the ACT manufacturer sales requirement. However, since all the fleet owners that subject to the ACF purchase requirements need to comply with the proposed zero emission schedule, regardless of their registration status, which includes many out-of-state vehicles that originally were not covered in ACT. We are seeing much more zero emission vehicles as a result from ACF, which is around 280,000 zero emission tractors by 2045. After a quick overview of the resulted zero emission vehicles or technology distribution from the current ACF proposal, now we can take a look at the amount of emission reduction the proposed regulation is bringing. All the emissions here shown or in the next couple of slides include projected ACF emissions under the current proposal, as well as a business as usual baseline that already accounts for benefits resulted from the currently adopted regulation, such as the ACT and HD Omnibus. The details with emission rates and modeling methodology can be referred to the NFAC 2021 technical document, which has already been updated using the latest available testing data and other information. We have also highlighted emission reduction in some key milestone years for California air quality and climate goals. For example, in terms of nitrogen oxide or NOx emissions, we will be seeing 20.4 tons per day reduction by 2031 and then 54.4 tons per day reduction in 2037. We have also computed the projected emissions for PM2.5 emissions. Here we include both exhaust and brake wear emissions. We have assumed a 50% reduction in brake wear emission from ZEV's regenerative braking capability, which was derived based on a study by the National Renewable Energy Lab. With the current proposed regulation, ACF will lead to 0.37 tons per day reduction in PM2.5 in 2031 and 1.03 tons per day reduction in 2037. In addition to criteria pollutants, we have also modeled the greenhouse gas emissions under the current ACF proposal. Please note that the data presented here only includes tank to wheel or tailpipe carbon dioxide emissions. However, the upstream GHG benefits, including benefits from renewable fuels, will be accounted for the ACF regulation and included in the staff report. With the current regulation proposal, ACF is projected to have 20.4 million metric tons per year carbon dioxide reduction by 2045. That brings us to the end of this presentation. In the near future, we will be seeking feedback on the emission inventory development and work closely with the REC team to improve the current inventory. In addition, we will implement the updated ACF emission inventory in the next version of MFAC. I have also put a contact information of myself and my manager, Fangyan, in case there is any question regarding the ACF emission inventory modeling, as well as the email address for general questions regarding MFAC. With that, I will turn it back to Craig.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. And I would like to make an announcement. There was an update to one of our presentation slides. Slide number 13 was recently updated. It's just a minor change. The content of the slide is still relevant, but we are in the process of posting the updated presentation to our website, so that should be posted shortly. But the presentation slide 13 in the presentation here is the correct version. So with that said, I would like to allow people to start asking questions or making comments. Again, I'm going to remind you to raise your hand, and when called upon, we will ask you to unmute your mic. And just a reminder, before you make a statement or ask a question, please state your name and affiliation so we know who you are. And we'll start by seeing if we have any hands raised or any questions.
Looks like we have plenty, Craig.
Okay.
All right. So first up, we have Edward Phillips, and then after that, Irving Negrani. So I've given you permission to speak. Ed, if you could give your affiliation and begin.
Thanks, Paul. Eddie Phillips with BNSF Railway. I have a general question and then a couple specific. So regarding the greenhouse gas emission reductions that are sought, and I've asked this on other CARB workshops, and I really haven't gotten an answer. Why isn't CARB pursuing a statewide mandate for renewable diesel, not only for the ACF, but for off-road and other internal combustion engines? With the ACF, the way it's structured, we're going to have diesel engines for at least the next 20 years. And a statewide renewable diesel standard would get close to 75% reduction in greenhouse gases from not only these sources, but off-road and stationary sources like backup generators much sooner than the slide. I think the last slide. So that's just a general question. So Craig, I don't know if you want to take that to someone at CARB. I've kind of made that same comment in one of the off-road workshops and some other workshops. It would help a lot of people who are going to be using internal combustion engines reduce their greenhouse gases, and it would of course help all of us by reducing those emissions. So that's a general question. And obviously you don't have to answer that one. Just maybe if you just said, you could have someone at CARB discuss that, because you guys did it with ultra low sulfur diesel, right? It was a statewide mandate some years ago. The second question is why did you look at yard tractors indoors? Yard tractors are under the cargo handling equipment regulation. They're not required to be reported. And I'm just a little not concerned, but questioning why doors was used. Doors, to my knowledge, doesn't have yard hustlers in their yard trucks in there. And then I don't know how the ACF is addressing third question is I don't know how the ACF is addressing third-party service providers that fall below the thresholds that operate quite a few trucks. They might have less, fewer than the number of trucks and less than the gross receipts. And they have distinct motor carrier numbers. They don't have, they're not flying the flag of a larger company. So I was wondering if you can maybe address that last question. Thank you.
Okay, I guess we can.
Hey, hang on, I was on mute. So thanks, Edward. We certainly appreciate those comments. As far as renewable diesel, yeah, we believe renewable diesel is a valuable thing to do. This regulation really is focused on getting to zero, and that's why we're looking at those zero emission vehicles and trying to get as many zero emission vehicles into the California fleet as soon as possible. Paul, maybe you can talk about the yard tractors. I wasn't quite sure. So I can tell you right now, yard tractors is a great application for zero emission trucks. And there's a lot of those in operation today, and we're going to continue to require those to go to zero.
Sure. It looks like I think Stephanie is going to be taking the yard tractor question. If you
okay.
Sure. So in terms of the yard tractor, we didn't include the CHE units because they will be regulated under another regulation, and we don't want to double count the emission benefits. And then in terms of doors database, I think we use Yard Gold and also some other additional information such as manufacturer information to identify yard tractors. So they're actually included in the doors database. And then I think we identified maybe around 1,300 units as of calendar year 2019. And this number is very similar to what we got from the ACT large fleet reporting. So it's a good agreement from the reporting data as well as the doors database.
And this is Tony, just to expand on that, just to make sure it's understood, the Advanced Clean Fleet proposal would include all yard trucks, both on-road and off-road, because once they're zero emission, there's really no significant difference versus today where they could actually have different engine standards being met. except for those that are subject to the cargo handling and equipment regulation, because there is a separate zero emission effort expected there.
Yeah, I guess to get back to your question a little bit. So the ones indoors currently would be those that have off-road engines but are not operating at ports. Ports are intermodal rail yards, so they would be outside the port facilities. So those are the ones indoors right now. The ones who are at the ports or rail yards are in the CHE regulation. So we're just capturing the ones that don't meet that specification.
Okay, right. And we're already converting our fleet of or the yard trucks at our facility to electric. We've done several projects in California, Stockton, San Bernardino, Hobart, and we have several in the works. So we're well aware of that. I was just questioning the inventory. When you stated you looked indoors, it kind of confused me because they're not required to be indoors if they're operating at an intermodal yard or port. And then the third question was the third-party service providers that fall under the threshold. Are they getting, in other words, are they not going to be required to be compliant with the zero emission technology phase in for the fleets? Because I think there are a lot of service providers out there that may fall under the thresholds in terms of gross sales and number of vehicles. But there are quite a lot of companies providing service, like service and repair to other vehicles and equipment. So I wondered if you could maybe talk a little bit about that.
Okay, this is Tony. I'll jump in. Yeah, those are not covered by this proposal, and you saw the emissions and the populations. So we're not covering every single truck at this time. Clearly, we've been getting different comments, and others have been suggesting that we cover every possible truck. But we're not planning that as part of this rulemaking until we're looking to get this initial start in this particular rulemaking to cover the categories we're talking about, starting with generally these priority fleets, if you will. And then, I think that might be a future decision to be discussed as to how to continue getting to the governor's goals. So this measure is not intended to cover every single truck in this particular proposal.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, next we have Irvi Negrani and then Jamie Levin. So Irvi, have you given me permission to speak? If you give your affiliation and begin.
Yep, this is Irvi Negrani, fleet development over at Powerflex, an EDF renewables company. And I wanted to ask two different questions. One, given that the governor's goals do have a full transition everywhere feasible by 2035, and the majority of this rules modeling goes out to 2050 without ever reaching a full transition. I know, Tony, you mentioned that there are other rules that are in parallel going to accomplish that. Is there a joint model that has been created that shows how this rule and those rules will combine to meet that ultimate goal? And if so, where can we see that data? And then the second question I've got is regarding the DMV data and sources that CARB used to come up with this analysis. Is there a way that those of us in the private sector could access an anonymized version, perhaps by census tract, to see what kinds of vehicle infrastructure will be needed where, so that we can do work in parallel to help support those needs prior to the vehicle purchase, as we know that the infrastructure is going to take significantly longer than the vehicle purchase side of things?
Hi, yeah, this is Fangyan, manager for MFAC development. Yeah, I can answer your questions. So your first question is regarding the executive order N77, 7920, like whether there is any joint model to evaluate the executive order, like in terms of emission or modeling. So yeah, as you may know, like we have developed the 2020 mobile source strategy, like aiming to achieve multiple goals like air quality, climate, as well as following the as close as to the executive order. So that could be a reference, like you can go to check the 2020 mobile source strategy. So along with that, we also developed a model called—
Does that 2020 analysis include this proposal though?
ACF proposal?
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't specify any proposal or any regulations because it's more about strategy or measures. Like it's a top-down approach to see what we can do to achieve these multiple air quality goals. So we didn't
I guess
spell out.
the question then is like, I've seen former plans about sort of the emissions reduction strategy, and I would love to see this proposal's model integrated into those models so that we can see how that fits together. Because normally, if you kind of wait for the annual plans, it doesn't impact sort of the regulatory timeline. And I would love to see on the regulatory timeline, as we're considering the business impacts, does this meet the overall state macro level goals?
Yeah, as you may see, like CARB has multiple tools to help us to achieve different goals. I think regulation development is one of them. Yeah, so ACF is one of the regulation, and also at the same time, we know that CARB also have incentive program and also other programs at the same time to help us to achieve these goals. So yeah, this is a good question. So I think regulation, or in terms of modeling, like we usually develop different models for regulation purpose. So yeah, so this one, like, yeah, I just want to refer you to mobile source strategy if it is possible for you to check as a reference. For the second question, you're asking whether there is any public available information about vehicle registration at census tract level to help with infrastructure. The answer is yes. So on the MFAC website, which is arb.ca.gov/MFAC, on this website, we have a database called Fleet Database. So on this Fleet Database, we have vehicle registration information with confidential information removed at an aggregated level to show the vehicle registration information by census tract. So hopefully that is helpful for you infrastructure or future planning. Thanks.
And does that database include the updated DMV data and the large reporting data that you were pulling for these models?
So for that database is mainly based on DMV vehicle registration information. So I think for the ACT large entity reporting that include businesses operating in California and also registered vehicles registered from other states, but also operating in California, right? So I would like Tony or Paul to clarify.
Okay, yeah, the reason I would love to see that sort of broken out separately for the vehicles impacted by this rule is like, especially if, as you pointed out on the class 2B to C3, with those vehicles being only 12% of the total inventory, if we were to look at just a general statewide inventory and not the targeted area, you would end up planning different types of infrastructure than what timelines this rule would suggest.
Yeah, so if it is only about class 2B, 2-3, we know these vehicles like operating in California and also registered in California is there is one very unlikely or with very minor vehicles registered from out of state. So from this fleet database, you can get sufficient information about class 2B, 2-3 regulated by ACF. But if you are going to talk about like line haul or class 7 to 8 tractors, there is possible that out of state registered from other states vehicles are not included in DMV database, of course.
Okay, thanks, Irby. Is there?
Yeah, we have a good number of hands up.
Okay.
All right, next we have Jamie Levin and then Kevin Brown. So Jamie, you should be able to you could give your affiliation and begin.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Thanks, Craig. It's Jamie Levin with the Center for Transportation and the Environment. And I'm wondering how you're going to, as you look at these targeted dates, how you're going to relate those to technology readiness level in three categories, one of which we just previously touched on. But as we are working with fleet operators in the class 7 and 8 categories, also class 6, we see three critical issues that face the fleet owners and the fleet operators. The first is range. Many of these smaller independent truckers have multiple duty cycles. So, they may have, in some cases, short haul trips, but in order to keep their business sustainable, they may have to do regional haul and longer haul trips. So it's kind of the idea of one size fits all. So range is a key factor in their ability to meet your targets. And I'm wondering how you're looking at that as it relates again to your targeted deadlines. Second key issue is the payload, and to the extent that they can sustain a similar payload to what they carry now. And what we've discovered, let's say in the class 8 tractor category, is that just being able to carry a 45,000 pound payload may not, in some cases, will not be sufficient. Given the gross vehicle weight rating is 82,000 pounds for zero-emission vehicles, we've got to look at what's the curb weight of a tractor. And even with fuel cell technology, we're still in the mid-20s. And in many cases, current operators are operating tractors in the 15 to 17,000 pound curb weight in order to be able to carry up to 55,000 pounds of payload. And this is a big issue, especially as you look at the upstream flow of goods off from maritime deliveries, the packaging of those goods with ISO containers and the like often will bring certain types of goods in with much heavier payload. So that's another key issue. And then previously it was touched on with respect to infrastructure. And the good news, of course, is CEC has adopted a pretty aggressive funding program that was announced several days ago with their clean transportation program, well over $1 billion of investment. But the key here is the timing of all this. So you've got your dates that you're targeting. If infrastructure is not in place when those vehicles are required to be purchased by fleet operators, how in the world are they going to operate and maintain a sustainable business? So the question there is how you're going to be looking at the actual availability of charging and fuel, in the case of fuel cell, hydrogen infrastructure. So those are my three key points, and that's that. Thanks for the time, but to me, those are very critical issues as it relates to your mandates.
Great. Well, thanks, Jamie. I will address two of those, and then the third one, I'll remind you that we are having a series of infrastructure meetings coming up, but I'll touch on that. The first one, range, we do understand that the early application of these electric trucks are going to be for last mile delivery, drayage operations. So if you look at the regulations, the structure of the regulation, we do look at the types of trucks that would have better suitability for electrifications. Those are the trucks that would require to be go to zero first in the early years. And then as the technology improves and the infrastructure is developed, we fully expect a more broad application of these electric trucks. In the payload, yes, we do understand that, especially when you look at electric tractors, battery electric tractors, that it does require a substantial amount of batteries. We've researched this, And we are seeing that there is probably about a 5,000 to 6,000 pound payload deficit right now. But a lot of that's depending on range as well, right? So if you have a short haul tractor, you may not have any weight issues at all. You may be able to haul that load. But when you get to the longer ranges, it does require more batteries. Again, there's been studies that say by 2030, we expect to weight is not expected to be an issue. But again, if you look at the structure of the regulation, a lot of the day cab tractors and long haul tractors don't come into play until the later years, 2027 and 2030. And then, yeah, infrastructure is a key element to this regulation. Again, we believe that fleets will be working towards installing their own infrastructure with the understanding that there will be a rollout of more publicly available infrastructure in the coming years. But again, we have 4 work group meetings coming up. So stay tuned. We'll be addressing those issues, and we'll have a detailed conversation with the experts. Right? We'll have the Energy Commission. We'll have representatives from the governor's office available to help address the infrastructure rollout.
Hey, thanks, Craig. I'm aware of those work group meetings.
Good.
I've already signed up for them, and I think, as you know, those are very important. I just think it's good that you're looking at these range and payload issues, and just would emphasize to be sensitive to the timing of all this, and keeping in mind that while, yes, certain trips are more adaptable to smaller payloads and the like, you have to look at the fleet owner and what their requirements are. And I mentioned this previously, there's kind of this idea of a one size fits all. If you're a small independent trucker, you may need a vehicle, or you may presently be using a vehicle that does a number of different duty cycles in order to sustain your business. And so that's what I think is really important to be tuned in to those concerns.
Understood. Thanks, Jamie. We appreciate that.
Thank you, Jamie. All right, up next we have Kevin Brown, then Mark Roost. So Kevin, I've given you permission to unmute, give your affiliation and begin.
Hi, this is Kevin Brown. I'm with the Manufacturers of Emission Controls Association. Our members produce components for both conventional and electrified trucks. And the question I have is, so with regards to emissions inventories, it's similar to the question that Irving Negrani was asking, but this question is specific to, has CARB performed any sensitivity analyses which model potential delays in the availability of zero emissions trucks? And can they share these results? And what are the results? Thank you.
Well, okay, this is Tony. I'll jump in. And no, the emissions inventory and results you see here reflect the timelines that we have in the regulation. And so, that's one of the things that's part of the process here of having the workshops, receiving the comments and so on, is factoring in how to address different potential issues. But at this point, I don't think there's any specific modeling here. It's definitely not reflected in the inventory. And it's something we clearly are monitoring the situation, but it's applying to every truck right now. And again, to a degree, is not necessarily expected to be a long-term issue. And keep in mind that, again, the regulation we're talking about here is, in essence, a 20-year timeline. So it's not a timeline that's only 4 or 5 years in this rule. And so, we'll be looking at those issues as we move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, up next we have Mark Roost and then Mike Tunnell. So Mark, I've given you permission to speak. If you could give your affiliation and begin.
Thank you. I'm Mark Roost with Sustainable Energy, Inc., and I'm also on the Board of Advisors for the Silicon Valley Clean Cities Coalition. We are looking at short to medium haul conversions being available in volume by the first half of 2022 and long haul by the fourth quarter of 2022 if we get the support we need. We have a plan for phasing in solar power to support charging during 2023. This is a major acceleration of results compared to the regulation, which sets a floor. We need to be able to plan incentives in order to manage a marketing and sales program to reach the short haulers with 2009 and earlier engine model years before the deadline, the December 31st deadline in 2022. Actually, we really need to reach the short haulers by the third quarter of 2022 to leave room for the long haulers in the fourth quarter of 2022, when we expect to have batteries available which will support the long haul truckers without having to slash their load levels. And that's because we are aiming for upwards of 2,000 watt-hours per kilogram, which is about 3 to 7 times what the rest of the battery industry is looking to reach in the next few years. We're looking to reach that when we reach volume production, which again, with the right support, can be technologically, it can be done by the fourth quarter. You know, we could be in volume production in the fourth quarter of next year. And so we would be providing the batteries to a company that has the conversion kits already designed and spec'd out and is ready to manufacture. There is a 4-month lead time because of the global supply chain issues, which again compresses the operations necessary to convert all the truckers with 2009 or earlier engine model years before the deadline. Or perhaps we can work out agreements with you to defer some of those deadlines for the longer haul truckers at least. But we are looking at a challenging but possible, feasible logistics and marketing process. We're going to need support from you in terms of information and in terms of incentives for the conversions, and also information or incentives for us as a startup, which is unfunded right now and has been, but have used up private funding. We really need to get non-dilutive funding in order to achieve the goals of converting the entire transportation fleet to battery electric by 2030, which is the science goal. So we're trying to use your goals as the floor and reach for the stars. And we have a lot of stuff worked out to be able to do that. And I would like to I'd like to know who to talk to. Who can I have as a continuing contact in CARB to be able to really get all the information flowing together and making appropriate decisions based on that to make this possible?
Sure. Well, thanks, Mark. It's good information, and we appreciate you providing an update on the technology. Absolutely, you can reach out to me, Paul, or we have if you can't get our contact information, you can go to our website. There's a ZEV Fleet. There's an email address. It's zevfleet@arb.ca.gov. Just reach out. We'll respond promptly, and I'd love to continue this discussion and work together. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, up next we have Mike Tunnell and then Janet Wittick. So Mike, I've given you permission to speak. If you could unmute, give your affiliation and begin.
Great, thanks, Paul. Mike Tunnell, American Trucking Associations. So thank you for sharing this information. And I'm just curious, trying to understand the vehicle population slide a little more, specifically slide 27, I believe, on the class 7 and 8. And I assume this is California registered plus IRP registered trucks operating in California. And I'm just curious, it's somewhat different than others estimates I've seen. So is this only the affected the vehicles associated with the affected entities that will be subject to this regulation, or can you expand on what the vehicle population is in this slide?
I think Stephanie, can you jump in for this question?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess for this slide, we include all the class 7 through 8 tractor population, including in-state, which are identified from the DMV registration database, as well as CAIRP or out-of-state, which are identified using IRP database or like some survey data. So this does include everything that we think will operate in California. But one thing to note that is this population here, we're only showing the daily population instead of an annual population. So that doesn't include every single vehicle that will come to California in a year, because in fact, inventory is based on, like, it's built for emission. So we need to account for like the difference between a daily snapshot, how many vehicles are operated on road, or like the total. I'm not sure where exactly you got your estimate, but this population is like on a daily basis instead of annual.
Okay, thank you. That was the issue I was struggling with when it said calendar year on the axis. I was thinking it was total, but I assume that you'll, as you look at impacts on this, the impacts will be all vehicles that enter California ultimately, rather than just on a daily basis, because those aren't necessarily the same vehicles, you know, as they come and go. So thank you, that clarifies that. And then last question, just I wanted to find out a little more about your turnover assumptions that you use in MFAC. So do you just use standard turnover assumptions? I mean, Jamie mentioned, you know, the one-to-one assumption that is important. You know, will electric be able to do the same duty cycles as our current vehicles? But in addition to that, I'm just wondering, as you look at years down the road, are you just assuming standard turnover? And even though the vehicles will cost substantially more than what is currently purchased, do you assume that will have no, you know, is there any assumptions associated with differences in electric vehicles that affect the turnover cycle of the fleet?
I guess I can get started, and Paul, please feel free to jump in, because I think some of them, I guess it's more on the regulation side. In terms of turnover, because again, modeling is more for like the emission purpose. So like in terms of like population, we do assume like a one-to-one replacement at this point, because once it's zero emission, it's like no emission, so we're not considering them in the model anymore. Like what's more important is how many internal combustion engines are left in the inventory. And then in addition to that, I guess just for the turnover fleet in general, well, for the drayage, because it does have the useful life requirement, so we do have that part considered, which is like an accelerated turnover as compared to what we are currently assuming, especially considering there won't be any new ICE vehicles added to the registry after the regulation is placed. So I guess that we do have the accelerated turnover for legacy fleets to zero emission vehicle for for drayage. And then for the high priority fleets, basically what we did is we use all these data sources to kind of flag the total number of vehicles that's subject to the high priority fleets requirement, and then basically just slice the total population with that fraction. And we assume like every year how much percentage of vehicle, like the total fleets have to be ZEVs. So in that case, there's also a little bit of like accelerated turnover, I guess, in that case, because some of the old vehicles will be replaced by zero emission. Not sure if that solves your question or if there's any other question related.
No, that's helpful. I'll just let it go at that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. All right, up next we have Janet Wittick, and after that, Sue Dexter. So Janet, I've given you permission to speak. If you can give your affiliation and begin.
Hi, good morning, everybody. This is Janet Wittick with the California Council for Environmental and Economic Balance, CEEB. Thank you for the time this morning. I have a few questions for you. The biggest one is I'm curious to know what alternatives will be modeled for the EIR and when you'll be ready to start talking about what the alternative scenarios are going to be. So that's one whole bucket. And I kind of thought we were going to talk about that today, but maybe it's in the works. I also want to say that I want to join in with other commenters about the assumption of a one-to-one replacement. A lot of us don't think that that's going to pan out that way. So that might be part of the alternative scenario discussion, but it's something that you guys may want to consider pretty strongly in terms of whether or not one-to-one is going to work in real world implementation. Kind of along with that, what might be helpful to all of us is if you guys can provide some sort of technical document that explains the assumptions that went into the modeling. This would be maybe similar to the TCO discussion draft that was released earlier. That was really, really helpful to understand, how you guys are approaching these questions and the modeling. So I would encourage you to do that as well. Kind of one small one, I had a question about how you are defining near zero for the public fleets. I assume it's based on the regulations proposed definition, but then within that, for the rest of the vehicles, did you model natural gas and diesel separately, or did you, I think that has some real implications in terms of the emission reductions. Similarly, on the one-to-one replacements, if it's more than a one-to-one replacement, that's going to throw off the PM2.5 modeling. So just as a side note, and this I guess maybe goes to wanting to have the assumptions better spelled out. Stepping back, I think other people have also hit on this, but I think that there could be a room for discussion about the extent to which CARB can start to share its data and the more granular data to help with infrastructure planning. Definitely the partner agencies, CEC, PUC, I'm sure can make use of that granularity, but I think others can as well, like we're hearing today. The OEMs probably in terms of looking at production needs and the different fleet makeups, but also the utilities who are going to have to plan for infrastructure. So maybe as a follow-up to today, a whole conversation about how the ACT, DOORS, and DMV data can be anonymized and aggregated, but provided to people in terms of those bigger kind of system plans. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Janet. I think we have a lot. Yeah. I can get started on the alternatives. So we are evaluating the alternatives to this regulation, and we're going to be discussing these in a couple of regulatory documents. First, I think the first to be publicly released will be our SRIA standardized regulatory impact analysis that comes out a few months before the rulemaking package. We'll be discussing a pair of alternatives there at the minimum. So that will be one. With the environmental analysis, the EA, that comes out with a staff report. We will have all the alternatives discussed in that document as part of what we need to put in there. I think at this point it's a little bit premature as the comment period closed just a couple weeks ago on ACF, and we're still evaluating all the different comments that came in. I think we have over 120 at this point on the comments and middle page. So we've received a lot of feedback. We're still going through and starting the modeling process about which ones we should be modeling and just assessing all the different alternatives that came in. Regarding the one-to-one replacement, that is something we're looking at. As Craig mentioned, we are looking at just based on the literature, what the weight and the actual demonstrations, what the weights of these vehicles are going to be, as well as mileage issues. We do have a couple things built into the rule, like the daily mileage exemption, which is one way of addressing that. I guess one comment regarding PM2.5 emissions, when we're talking, I guess, non-one-to-one replacements, one of the general ideas we have is that if there is, let's say, a 2-for-1 replacement, that the two vehicles will not be doing twice the miles, they'll be doing the same amount of miles just over between the two vehicles. So I'm not sure where the PM increase will be coming from there. This is kind of how we're looking at that if there is a more than one-to-one replacement, then the actual miles should stay the same in that situation.
Yeah, this is Tony, just kind of jump in on that topic. I mean, so in terms of the emissions calculations, it would largely be unchanged. What you're referring to me is more of a cost impact concern. And so
I don't know if that's assuming then that the payload or the carrying capacity would stay the same. But if it's reduced, then both your vehicle numbers and your mileage would increase to carry the same amount of load.
Okay, but okay, so in your comment, then it would be, hey, if there's more trips overall, then there's more miles.
Yeah,
that could affect.
And there may be other parts of the rule too, where one could expect that fleets will have to change duty cycles and increase mileage, as well as number of vehicles.
Okay, I see the comment, but that would largely not affect the NOx emissions calculations because we would still be doing the zero emissions when you're talking about a zero emission vehicle as far as
yes, correct. But it would change the PM, and it would also change your upstream emissions. So if you do like with the just tailpipe, then no NOx. But if you, as soon as you go upstream, then that's going to change.
No, understood. Right. And but again, part of our expectation is, yeah, sure, fleets might change somehow how they distribute their routes differently, but that by and large, the way we've structured the schedule would largely defer many of the upgrades to a later time period for those more challenging use cases, for example. And then as was touched on earlier, in terms of drayage and others, is like, yeah, that's a more concentrated location, if you will, easier, if lack of a better term, to locate infrastructure where needed. I'm not suggesting that it's easy per se, but I mean, comparative to having every truck having access to publicly available infrastructure. So that is something we were looking at, potentially trying to develop a reasonable scenario in terms of a cost modeling aspect. I'm not sure. And then honestly, as Craig mentioned, it's in the time horizon associated with the rule, number of these issues we don't foresee as being a problem per se. In the early stages, sure, there could be some challenges in terms of use cases, but at the same time, when you're talking smaller percentages of the fleet, it's also more manageable to place the vehicles where they are suitable in your operation. So, okay, we appreciate the comment.
What about the natural gas vehicles?
Yeah, this is something like, just want to add on, like in terms of emission modeling, natural gas vehicles, they are treated the same as diesel as well as gasoline vehicles. So we don't specify like the difference between ICE fuel types. So when we are replacing these ICE vehicles by zero emissions, they are seen as has the equal chance. Natural gas has an equal chance as diesel or gasoline vehicles to be replaced by that.
Okay, so I think this speaks to the need to have a technical document explaining these assumptions, because we all know the low NOx natural gas engine is 90% less than the diesel. So if they're being modeled as the same, that just means that then the baseline
No, let's make sure we're not going in the wrong direction here.
Okay.
In the omnibus regulation is reflected in the modeling here because we're starting 2024, and the
Okay.
omnibus regulation is part of that. It's achieving a 90% reduction in the real world, in essence. And so the diesel and the CNG engine in terms of NOx emissions is effectively the same because they have to meet the standard either way, regardless of fuel type. And so there is no advantage in what you're thinking right now. What I think you're thinking of is that there is an optional standard right now that some of the CNG engines have been certified to, that they are cleaner than what is produced today. But starting in 2024, the standard ratchets down so that they all have to meet the same standard.
But what about the legacy population then that's still on the road? I mean, omnibus is for the new vehicles, but
Yes.
the modeling is everybody. And so, I think maybe again, speaking to, I don't want to take up too much more time, but maybe speaking to the need of a technical document that some of us, all of us can start to unpack. And on the alternatives assessment, I think it would be helpful to then, get a technical document out that explains how the modeling was done, and then have a conversation with the public stakeholders before you release those alternatives so that, hopefully we can input in terms of what the scenarios are going to be and not just read them in the document. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Janet. Okay, next we have Sue Dexter and then Ray Pingle. So Sue, I've given you permission to speak. If you could unmute, give your affiliation and begin.
Great, thank you so much. Sue Dexter from USC. I'm a researcher studying heavy-duty ZEV drayage trucks. And my question revolves around the location of data that was mentioned by Stephanie. And I think that this pretty much goes to the previous person who was talking about the technical report for the data. If we could know where that is, that would be great. I assume that it already exists. And then secondly, also, I reiterate the life cycle phases besides the tank to wheels that needs to be included. And Stephanie again said that there was some additional data that was provided in a staff report for that. So if you could also provide that, that would be very helpful. Those are my questions. Thanks.
Yeah, I can start with this question. So Stephanie, feel free to chime in later. Just I want to clarify, Sue, regarding the drayage truck data location, the technical report. So did you mean how did we identify drayage trucks, or in general about vehicle registration data?
Basically, there was the data that was, yes, not just the data for the vehicle population, but the other data that was presented in the analysis for the emissions. I'm specifically looking at class 7 and 8 trucks, right? So where is that? Where can we get to the numbers of that? Because I would like to play around with the numbers myself and compare it to some of the analysis that I've done within my research, just to see where there might be some differences, that kind of thing.
Right. Okay. So in general, what Stephanie presented today here, the major data resource is MFAC 2021, which is a public database. We can share the link in the chat so that everyone can access to this database. So in terms of ACF related emission inventory and also the data and the analysis, we are going to have an official technical document along with the ACF staff report released together. It is usually appear as an appendix talking about emission inventory. So there we will spell out all the details and assumptions. And I yeah, if you like want to get information before that, I think it's better to talk with Tony and Craig, and because they are the gatekeeper and feel ready when they feel ready to share the information. Yeah, so regarding life cycle, GHG emission benefits, yeah, I just saw Stephanie share with you the MFAC platform. Yeah, so that part is under development. So like it can be shared, yeah, along with other public information ACF team is going to share with. So yeah, I think, yeah, that part, yeah, for sure we will consider about the upstream GHG emissions related with this regulation.
Yeah, Sue, this is Craig. Feel free to reach out to me directly or again through our ARB, I'm sorry, zevfleet@arb.ca.gov. If there's anything we can share, we certainly will do that. We're not trying to hide anything here. But as Fang mentioned, there's a lot of this stuff is already available, and we could just point you in the right direction.
Great, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You bet. You bet.
Thank you, Sue. Okay, next we have Ray Pingle, and then after that, Chris Shimoda. So Ray, I've unmuted you, give your affiliation and begin.
Great, thanks. Hi all, this is Ray Pingle, Sierra Club, California. If you could please bring up slide 27 again. So that's on the 7 to 8 trackers, the emissions on that one. And I'm still struggling, and I don't think I'm the only one to understand what this slide says. And on a broader basis, you know, what's really happening with 7 and 8 tractors that are registered in the state and that are from out of state. And this is a really important subject, obviously, because half of the emissions come from these 7 to 8 tractors. So what I'd like to suggest is that CARB write, I mean, just a little short paper on this one subject. I mean, it could be 3 pages long, but some of the basic questions that would really help us, and I think help other stakeholders, is, you know, what are the number of 7 to 8 tractors on California roads today? What percentage of those are registered in California? You know, what are registered outside of California? And then in those two, for the ones outside of California, what percentage of those, if any, will be regulated by the ACF? And then whatever other assumptions that you all are using to calculate this, because this is surprising when I look at this, that the ACF would cause such a high percentage. And I appreciate you've already discussed it in response to Mike's question, but I'm still not getting it. So I think just a foundational, you know, mini white paper on this would be very helpful to this overall rulemaking. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment and question. I guess, so in terms of the truck or just like the daily snapshot statewide population, I think you may find that in the MFAC, current MFAC as well. Like in MFAC, we specifically define our tractors as in-state tractors, CARP tractors, and out-of-state tractors. And then we have all the population or derived or activity and even emissions, they're derived based on the latest available information. And we do have the projection of activity and emissions with considering the current in place regulations in the current MFAC as well. And then in the technical documentation, you may find more detailed information such as retention or accrual, you know, like these kind of information, and also the data sources that we use to derive the original MFAC model. And then I guess in terms of the MFAC related question, for example, how many vehicles are affected, I think this kind of like goes back to Paul, Craig, or Tony again, because I think once we move forward with the documenting and everything, I think we will figure out what kind of information, what details we would like to include.
Okay, thank you for that, Stephanie. But I just want to, maybe I'm dense, but and y'all are modeling analysts that live and breathe all of this and really know how to use the MFAC. But if you could just boil down some of those things that you just reviewed orally, and maybe in a subsequent presentation, have 2 or 3 slides on this where you document these assumptions. to make it easier for us that aren't modeling analysts to really understand at a more gestalt level, how we get to these vehicles and how the ACF is going to regulate those class 7 and 8 tractors that are not registered in the state of California, and how all that works. I really appreciate it. And like I say, I don't think I'm the only one. I know I've got colleagues that spent a lot of time on vehicle analysis, and they don't understand this that well either. So I really appreciate any help you can give in that regard. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ray. This is Craig. Yeah, I'm actually taking notes. I'm going to see if I can put together some fact sheets, because you're right. It would be nice to have something you can point to that illustrates the emission reductions we're expecting to get, and how we envision getting those.
Great. Thank you so much, Craig. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Thank you, Ray. Okay, next we have Chris Shimoda and then Nicole Rice. So Chris, I've given you permission to speak. If you could unmute, give your affiliation, and begin.
Hey, morning, Paul. Chris Shimoda, California Trucking Association. So got a couple of questions. I'll start with slide 12. So wanted to ask what the modeling staff is using for the assumed activity daily mileage for the drayage fleet. The reason I ask is I think that the current approach in MFAC is something like 200 daily miles, in that neighborhood. But if you look at the breakdown of especially the Port of LA, Port of Long Beach fleet, you have a significant number. I think it's around 7,000 of those trucks who are classified as infrequent callers. So they do less than 10 visits to the port a week. So I wanted to, just see if that daily mileage was going to be carried over for that whole population, specific to Port of LA and Port of Long Beach. And then to ask, what is the assumed activity for the rail population, if it is going to be the 200 miles, or if a different daily mileage was assumed for the rail piece of this population?
Sure, I guess I can get started on that question too. So the current MFAC, the accrual rate is based on the call bias survey data, if I remember correctly. And I think on average, we are seeing 50,000 miles annual accrual rate for the average truck. So that's around 160 miles per day. And then, so like, that's well, I guess there are like minor difference between ages, or like between the 3 port truck categories, but essentially it's pretty like the data we're seeing are pretty close to each other. And then in terms of the inactive trucks, I guess they are included in other categories, that's as the in-state tractors. And then I guess Sherry can add more detail if needed, because I think she's more familiar with the accrual or the heavy duty module we are using in the MFAC. And then in terms of the real yard tractors, so originally the population and then I guess some similar characteristics were taken out from the Class 8 tractors. But in terms of activity, we are using, I think we're using similar as what we do for port trucks in the current model. So I think they capture really similar characteristics.
Yes,
Great,
you're
thank
right,
you.
Stephanie. Yeah.
Oh, my apologies. Just a quick follow-up on that. So yeah, I see that there's no assumed crossover between the rail population and specifically the Port of LA and Long Beach population, and this comment would apply to Oakland as well. So for instance, you have trucks going from the ports of LA and Long Beach to both near dock and downtown rail yards fairly frequently. Was there an attempt to cross-reference, because both of these entities keep either registries or there's some visibility on what trucks are visiting both ends of these trips? Was there an attempt to parse out what population of the rail yard fleet is in fact already accounted for in the Port of LA and Long Beach fleet or the Port of Oakland fleet?
That's a great question. And actually, I think in the data that we got from Real Yards, they do include a separate sector basically saying this, if this truck was in the port drayage list as well. So I think this 8,988 number is after we took out the overlap between the port and Real Yard drayage.
Okay, great, thank you. And then slides 28 and 29 have 3 questions, comments. So the business as usual includes ACT and low NOx omnibus, but just to clarify, this does not include heavy duty inspection and maintenance or an assumed federal clean truck initiative. Is that correct?
Right, that is correct. This is not considering the 2 regulations that you mentioned, but I think eventually HD Omnibus will be included in baseline as a separate scenario.
Got it. Yeah, and
HDNF, sorry.
Got it. Yeah, and heavy duty inspection and maintenance, I just wanted to point out, is going to have a fairly significant impact on the baseline. I looked at the numbers from the rulemaking package, and in 2037, you're talking about 81 tons per day of NOx and about 0.7 tons per day of PM. So it is significant for your modeling exercise here, and that rule will be adopted inactive ahead of the ACF requirements. So I do think it is reasonable to include that rule in the baseline assumptions. And so wanted to ask, because I think this is the same approach that modeling staff took in the ACT, is why is the brake and tire wear and exhaust combined for the PM emission assumptions? And the reason why I ask is that, you know, this is at the end of the day not a brake and tire wear standard. That is a co-benefit of regenerative braking, but the exhaust emissions make up only about 10% of the diesel PM inventory in later years. This is at least in MFAC 2014. So I think it would be reasonable to separate out the benefits from the tailpipe emissions from the brake and tire wear as, you know, sort of more of a co-benefit of moving to that technology. I do think that it's important to show what specifically the benefits are to the exhaust emissions. So just a comment there. And then wanted to ask whether or not the PM emissions inventory and the NOx, for that matter, accounts for any of the shifting of the emissions from the tailpipe to the power generation. And those are my questions. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Chris, for the comment. Yeah, so it's not that difficult for us to separate the PM emission benefits or the scenarios by exhaust only and brake wire emissions. So we definitely can do that in other upcoming workshops or documents. Yeah, in terms of power generation, yeah, so for right now, like all the presentation we are doing here only reflect tailpipe. That means tank to wheel emissions. So for criteria pollutants, we didn't include the upstream emissions from power generation.
And I can add a little bit on that. So on ACT, we did look at this. So when we did the upstream well to tank for greenhouse gas emissions, those were factored in. We plan to do the same for this rulemaking. We just weren't able to have that ready for this presentation. I think they generally show the reduction in upstream emissions as well as we are expecting the power generation to become greener over time as we have more renewable sources come online, and that is expected to result in lower upstream emissions versus petroleum refinement. For the criteria emissions, those are regulated as stationary sources, so including, and they're not co-located with where the vehicles are deployed. So I think we tend to look at those on the stationary side rather than include them in the vehicle analysis for the vehicle regulations.
So Paul, just a quick comment on that is, so is this assuming that you know, for instance, the fairly significant load that is being created by this population, you know, I mean, that there's a lot of variability there with how you assume the vehicles are being charged and at what speed. But is there a separate analysis going on to see what those increased emissions are? Because they will exist. You know, and I would assume if you're going to be doing a well to tank or tailpipe greenhouse gas analysis, you know, a similar analysis could be done for the criteria pollutants, because I mean, they do shift, right? It's not going away completely.
We can look into that. I'm not sure I know the best answer at this point.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, just I don't know, not to really add too much to it, but yeah, I think some of the things you're asking for are done in different scenarios, but not necessarily associated with the rulemaking itself. But I can't be sure, so I think we could try to look into some of the modeling that does look at a variety of issues, including our fuel sources and the emissions associated with those. I anticipate that's covered in other studies that the agency does, but I can't really speak to that.
Well, and Tony, just a quick comment on that is, you know, with respect to this rulemaking specifically is, I mean, this regulation in ACT, you know, anything that shifts from, you know, diesel or gasoline to, you know, these various other technologies is the factor that will shift the emissions, you know, from the tailpipe to the power generation source. And so I do think that it is reasonable for you guys to take a look at what those impacts will be, you know, as opposed to doing a sort of macro level analysis in other documents. So just a comment, I do think it is worth looking into for this rule, because this is the, you know, if you want to say the event that is going to cause those emissions to shift, you know, it's worthy of analysis.
Sure. No, yeah, I understand. I guess we can look into the question, but I guess for people that are listening too, is like, well, we would also, of course, that would reflect that you would be distributing a lot less gasoline and diesel with trucks and pipelines and other things too. So I'm not sure that there would be an increase. It would be more of where does it occur? And you know, that is a, I mean, it's a legitimate question, but it's ultimately, I guess something we'd have to look into to be able to answer that more specifically.
Got it. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, next we have Nicole Rice, and then after that, David Rothbard. So Nicole, I've given you permission to speak. If you could unmute, give your affiliation and begin.
Great, thank you. This is Nicole Rice with the California Natural Gas Vehicle Coalition. I first wanted to start out by just aligning myself with the comments that were made by the representative from SEEB. I agree that many of the assumptions that we're looking at are made in accordance to the deadlines and the goals that have been established in this proposed regulation and other regulations, but they are not taking into account the market factors, like the discussion about alternatives and how we're going to deal with that. And they're not taking into account about how the market will respond. For instance, I apologize, I have a phone ringing here. For instance, the comment was made about diesel and renewable natural gas use, that, you know, diesel will be able to meet the engine requirement in the omnibus bill, but whether or not that is going to happen at the time that's been identified in the omnibus bill, that is still yet to come into effect, is still an outstanding question. So, and we definitely don't take that into account as it was identified with the legacy vehicles. So, so I just wanted to align myself with those comments, that I think this is where a detailed document that explains kind of the granular aspects of the assumptions would be helpful to understand. And I also wanted to state that it was said that some of these things will be looked at as we review the SRIA, and that is actually much further down the road than the process we are right now. So I think that it would be helpful to have those discussions now, where stakeholders and commenters can engage in that discussion. And therefore, by the time we get to that process, we'll have some real solid, real world data for which you all can base your analysis. So I think at this point, I want to go to the original and initial question that I had. And this was made by the commenter earlier from the Engine Manufacturers Association. He asked about the availability of ZEVs, and it was commented that staff will look into that issue as we go along. But there's nothing in the proposed regulation language that allows for an option to consider that case scenario if ZEVs are not available, or a way really to correct if we get down the line and we get to the effective dates and we realize that zero emission trucks are not commercially available at the scale with the 1-to-1 ratio and all the things that we've talked about in this setting and before. So I just wanted to hear from staff how they plan to address that, given that there's nothing in the language that allows for you to correct or pivot if that becomes the case.
Thank you for the comments, Nicole. Yes, Tony, are you able to jump in? I can try to take some of these as well.
You want me to start, or?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, the broader, one, actually, I would like to just get a clarification. You referred to the omnibus bill. And just make sure we're talking the same terminology. You're referring to the new engine standards.
Yes, I apologize. The omnibus,
okay.
Correct.
Yeah, so we're not going to model a scenario where the omnibus regulation doesn't take effect. It's something that our board's adopted. It's a matter of just days potentially for it to be formally approved. And so that is a regulation. It is enforceable. And so if the manufacturers do not meet the standard, they will not be selling the engines here in California. To me, that's part of just the base assumptions we're going to use. And then as we touched on, there is the heavy duty inspection and maintenance program that is being considered by the board here in December. And so we will show what the results would look like, assuming the board adopts it, and it's ultimately approved. But our baseline, or legal baseline, is what's already been approved in essence. And that's a requirement that we have to adhere to, just to make sure we're on the same page there. In terms of vehicle availability, there's more than 100 different models available right now in pretty much every weight class category, and a lot more coming. And so I think part of the process and the comments that we've gotten, as Paul touched on, there was more than 120 formal comments plus additional ones. Those are the kinds of things that we are looking at and seeing, do we need to have something specific in the rule to address situations that might be, we would presume at this point would be less common but still could occur, or how we should approach it. So that's part of the process. I don't know what the other comments were, Paul. Here's the beginning.
Yeah, I guess just broadly, just talking about how we're kind of setting up the requirements to and how they align with the market. We are trying to, this is a regulation that goes into the future, and we are trying to make the market do something it may not do by itself and make it transitioning to a fully zero emission fleet. So we are, as part of this, we are trying to evaluate where the technology is and identify the pathways to achieve these goals. We are looking at what technology exists, both battery electric and fuel cell electric, and how they're performing, as well as these different issues that have been brought up. We've heard about infrastructure. We're having a series of work groups. We're evaluating weight, payload, range, all those different factors. And those different issues are informing the different requirements we're saying forward in terms of when different groups of vehicles are being electrified, and what portions of the fleet will be electrifying in the first place. So that's kind of how we've set up this regulation based on what the market factors are, where would we foresee the vehicle availability with, which will be helped by the Advanced Clean Truck Regulation, which is requiring manufacturers to produce a growing portion of zero-emission vehicles. So we are trying to tie all these factors together to make the rule so that the timelines identified match up with the market factors that are They're going to be improving into the future with all these different things going on at the same time.
Yeah, and that was a good point, Paul. Is that, and then of course, as you know, the preceding this particular effort, the Advanced Clean Truck Regulation requires the manufacturers to sell zero-emission trucks here in the state as well. And so that's part of why we're confident there's going to be more vehicles, because they have to produce them.
Well, we'll appreciate that as a follow-up. I appreciate those comments and that information. But I do still believe, as has been said by many commenters throughout these workshops, that there is still an aspect of whether or not the market's going to be able to respond based upon the deadlines that have been identified and by the deadlines that have been identified. And so those contingencies are really not reflected in the language. For instance, the alternative that's proposed right now under the Advanced Clean Fleet language is a technology that staff has said doesn't exist. So how can that operate as an alternative if the zero emission vehicle is not commercially available? So we have always been of the position, and we included this in our comments, that there needs to be a viable clean technology that is available as an alternative while we're waiting for the zero emission vehicles to come online in scale and can be used at a 1-to-1 replacement ratio, which I think is very important. But Tony, I don't want to belabor this too long. I understand we're on a time limit, but you mentioned that there are more than 100 models, I think that was the term you used, of zero emission vehicles available. And I know this keeps coming up in various conversations. Is there any information that you can provide us, that CARB can provide the stakeholders, so that we can see exactly what these models are, what is their production dates, their rollout dates, their delivery dates, all of that information that would be helpful in some of these assumptions. When can you provide that to us?
Yeah, we can provide that in the future, but if you want to go today, go to our HVIP website and you can look at all of the vehicles that are available right now, that are commercially available right now. And then of course there's more announcements of other ones coming in the future, but that's not reflected in the HVIP list. But you can use that today.
Okay, and then I would also just, in conclusion, would like to suggest that it's a part of the working groups that we maybe do a work group on availability, commercial viability of the vehicle, so we can dig into this issue a little deeper with some real concrete data to be able to discuss this further before we go further on into the regulatory process. So thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Okay, next we have David Rothbart, and after that, Jamie Levin. So David, I've given you permission to speak. If you could unmute, give your affiliation, and begin.
Thank you. Good morning. This is David Rothbart. I'm representing the Southern California Alliance of Publicly Owned Treatment Works. Thanks for the presentation today. Questions along the lines of what you've been hearing already, an extension of the last set of comments. I was curious about when we're doing modeling and we're projecting what's going to happen when new vehicles are required to be purchased, we're making certain assumptions of how many vehicles will be purchased, and it's unknown. You're essentially saying we assume this is what's going to happen when vehicles turn over, but as vehicles get more expensive or there isn't infrastructure, it may not meet our projections. So my suggestion would be, like a lot of modeling where there's unknowns, can we look at error bars saying here's a likely scenario, projected scenario, just a bandwidth of here's the likely outcome we may have with adoption as we project versus maybe if infrastructure is not as we predict and the vehicles are not as readily available or people are not able to afford them, here's the other band. So you see kind of an error bar would be my suggestion for modeling moving forward. I think it's more realistic looking at those scenarios. And something else that, since I kind of live in South Coast, I needed to say, as far as like slide 28 showing the overall projected NOx reductions, we have something already in the South Coast 2016 AQMP that said we needed to get about 111 tons per day reductions off the mobile source sector, and we're really essentially saying it's not going to happen. which is problematic. And kind of my ask would be, beyond what you're proposing here, please look at all options to see what we could do to get reductions as quickly as possible. I know the focus is on electrifying everything, but if there are other technologies that are just as clean that'll get your reductions quickly or more quickly, we should really consider that. And last comment would be on slide 30, where it's looking at the carbon reductions for greenhouse gas improvements. I'm curious why we're only looking at tank to wheel projections. Since this is a global issue, I really would like to look at, excuse me, what the global impact will be. And we really, I know it's something that's difficult to do, but if we're gonna have, excuse me, I got a frog here. If we're looking at global impacts, we should look at the one-time mining impacts that are going to go into this and really look at what is the global impact from what we're doing, at least for the state, and see what we're doing and how to best mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. So I just would highly encourage we look at a broad aspect of the greenhouse gas emissions as well. So thank you very much for letting me have comments in this opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, so David, thanks for the comment. Yeah, regarding well-to-wheel GHG emissions, as Paul and Stephanie mentioned multiple times at this work group meeting, like this is a general exercise for us to do to have a well-to-wheel GHG inventory. It's just in this case, due to the timing issue, like we want to have this workshop before the results are ready for upstream emissions. So that's why we only presented the tailpipe GHG emissions just for this work group meeting. So we will have the full life cycle or the upstream GHG emission ready when the results are done.
And I think one thing to add is regarding the other impacts, like impacts of mining and so on, those will be covered in our environmental analysis as part of our CEQA requirement. So we will be looking at all the impacts associated with the production of zero-emission vehicles, such as mineral extraction and those other impacts. So they aren't a part of this emissions analysis, but they are a part of the overall analysis we will be doing as part of ACF.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And just one thing to remember, since I'm in the waste industry and I do a lot of recycling, if there could be some discussion of the recycling of the lithium batteries and what the market looks like, we don't want to have unintended consequences of generating a lot of battery waste and having another problem to deal with moving forward. It'd be nice to have a complete circle of the recycling process as we start transitioning to electric vehicles.
Agreed. Thank you, David. Okay, so next I see Jamie Levin. I'm realizing we're actually at time, so suppose this will be our last commenter for the day. Okay, Jamie, I've given you permission to speak.
Hey, thanks, Paul. This may be a question for Stephanie. On slide 12, regarding the truck inventory for drayage, my understanding is there are a number of trucks that are not necessarily registered for terminal access, let's say at the Port of Oakland, but there are still many more drayage trucks operational that run from yard to yard and operate from yards that are outside the terminals. So are you, I'm just concerned that this inventory may be way understated.
Yeah, so I think, Paul, you may want to clarify the definition about drayage trucks.
Yeah, sure. So the drayage trucks are those that are visiting the state's intermodal seaports and intermodal rail yards and seaports. So it doesn't capture those that don't enter the port facilities. I will note that we are capturing a large portion of those with the high priority requirements. I think you can see that on slide number 23, that a good portion of the class 7 and 8 tractors are going to be captured under the high priority requirements. So if you could pull up slide 23, that would be great. So I think we aren't capturing every single drayage truck. I mean, we're capturing all the drayage trucks, the trucks that are not entering the ports. A large portion of them, over 50%, are still going to be included in the overall ACF requirements under high priority and eventually the 100% fleet requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. And I don't see any more hands up.
All right, well, and we are at 11 o'clock, so I will go ahead and conclude our work group meeting. I would just like to thank our participants and our panelists for presenting the information, and we, again, this workshop work group is being recorded. The recording will be made available on our website shortly here in the next couple of days. And I can't think of anything else. Oh, just a reminder that keep checking our website, because we will have continued work group meetings. The next ones will be focused on infrastructure. And if we have any more after that, we will certainly make those announcements on our website. So thanks again, everyone, and we will talk to you again shortly. Oh, and I guess if I don't see you, have a great Thanksgiving, right?
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, Craig.